down in the spring. But to know the depth of my feelings, I want you to know that the last night when we were leaving from Willow Ridge, I took all of my children out after dinner and we walked through that plant. And I said to them, I want you to know you've been in a great place with great people who've accomplished great things. My oldest son is a very successful rocket engineer with Lockheed, was. My second is in technical areas. My third is a key C executive in the IT world for one of the largest Chinese IT companies. Their aspirations, I think, are out of these buildings. Thank you. Now, we live in Baton Rouge. And you're very entitled to say, well, where's Baton Rouge? Well, it's sort of in the middle of Louisiana. And we're there because our home of many years in New Orleans was flooded with 4 feet of water and destroyed. We lost a lot, but not our health. And we moved with my 98-year-old mother to move in with my daughter and our family in Baton Rouge. Now, Baton Rouge has a story. And the reason is, when the French showed up and started appearing around there, the Indians finally realized they weren't going to leave. And more of them came. So the Indians looked at these fire sticks they had to make noise and kill people. They realized, we can't beat them. And the Indians said, we can outsmart them. Now the Indians weren't dull people. Okay? So the Indians said, let's have a meeting on the banks of the Mississippi River at this point. And the Indians came there and they skinned a tree and took hands of iron ore, I don't know where they got it in Louisiana, and they dyed the tree and they made it a nice red. And they sat down and said, okay, Frenchie, here's the deal. We live in peace. We will live north of this tree and you'll live south of this tree. It's a Baton Rouge. And the French said, okay. But the Indians would figure they were in the swamp. They were all going to die off, and then we'd have our place back. But the French kept coming, and the tree, and that's why the state capital of Louisiana is named Red Tree. Be careful negotiating with Indians. All right. I'm pleased to be with you, and thank you, Neeson, for inviting me. I remember, as a youth, a long time ago, the authors of Flash Gordon's series had Flash Gordon traveling around the cosmos, but always returning for his energy to Niagara Falls. And I kind of come back to get my energy here too, because such fond memories and such wonderful people. And after all, look at Larry Bell. Larry Bell was born in a little town called Mentone, Indiana. And I went there once. And you got to go to the local hardware store, and he gets the key, and then you walk across the street, and they open it up, and it's the museum they try to preserve. Go to Mentone, Indiana. I took a picture of an LCAC and a contribution, and they were so pleased. They're such wonderful people. And so he came from Mentone, Indiana, subsequently ended up in Niagara Falls, and in a few short years, 1934 to 1944, in that short period, he had built a worldwide recognized organization of 40,000 people. So when we think X1, Larry Bell, you got to realize what giants we follow. This weekend, we're commemorating one of his greatest accomplishments, the X1. Above all, I think we want to assure the people they recognize that his legacy still goes on. And I'm a small part of that. And that's what I want to share with you. I want to give you a report card, because that Skimmer 1, that's modeled there, was designed and built and set things things on a course. And when you leave today, you will realize how great this was and how we expanded. And many of you were a part of that. So, first of all, let me encourage you to read Hugh's book. You will be amazed at how much good you did. You have to read that book, okay? It was Bell Aircraft, it was Bell Aerosystems, it was Bell Aerospace, but common to both, underneath it was a technical push, a requirement pull, and a blending. I don't care what technology we dealt with, and what end of the building we're in, that was kind of the dynamics. You could sum it up that way. When I first came to Bell in '66, Bob Ames was Vice President of Manufacturing. And I was pleased that he put me in charge of manufacturing projects. And one of them that he said, this is yours personally, that's meant a lot, was to be the manufacturing manager for the Lunar Module Asset Engine. And in 1968, there were 7 astronauts, who most of whom came to the plant individually, and my honor to tour them around the plant and have them meet the engineers, the machinists, the welders, and have everybody have a personal stake in this wonderful person that came up from Houston to meet us. There was no backup to the engine. There was no alternative. I'll have questions when we finish.
You speak closer to the mic.
Yes, I will. Thank you. Thank you. One day, I had Neil Armstrong for the entire day. What a wonderful human being. He was born, not too far from where the Wright brothers were born. So, he went back and told the other astronauts that he had faith in Bell to get them off the moon. Now, that's powerful. And let's go turn. Thank you. Does that sound better?
Oh,
Can you hear me back there now? Thank you. I'm new to this particular machine. In this building, you press a button, you might be ejected. So, when I was growing up, my hobby was making model airplanes. And as a boy, the name Larry Bell was well known in Queens Village, Long Island, New York, and all over the world. And everybody had such respect for him. But I can tell you, I never expected that I would someday be selected to lead the company he founded. And that's how deep the personal ties I have with you and your organization. I'm going to discuss the technologies a bit in the little time we have. I'm going to discuss them in development and some comments about how we work them through government and how we get them operational, and some specifics of absolute critical points where it all could have been over or moved forward. And these were times when the Bell hovercraft were evolving and being developed, where there were significant forces trying to put the United States Marines out of business. And I don't mean overseas, I mean in Washington. There was a prestigious think tank that had hired one retired Air Force officer and another retired Army guy, and they were writing position papers for the Congress, making the case that the era of opposed assault landings was obsolete. It was over. And divert the funds into the Navy submarine program and a certain Army program. This was boiling up, and it was going to come up to a congressional hearing. advocate for sustaining the capability of the United States Marines, fell to the first 4-star ever from the state of Mississippi, a Marine 4-star general by the name of Lew Wilson, who happened to wear the Congressional Medal of Honor, who happened also to have only one lung because he dove on a grenade and saved some Marines' lives and lost a lung. And this was the man that was going to carry the baton of what you worked on and we worked on, and would have one day in front of Congress to make his case. He chose to come to New Orleans. At that time, the Marines were a department of the Navy. He didn't even have a personal plane to travel with. Now, every pencil pusher in the Pentagon's got a personal plane. Not really, I'm only kidding. But Lew Wilson came down and met us, and we were in NASA offices. We had no Bell facilities, we didn't own any facilities. We had to function with NASA factory area, NASA offices. The 26 families that left here and came down were in that area, and we had grown. His briefing was finished, and we took him out to the factory area, and we had built a full-scale model of what we wanted the landing craft air cushion to look like. And he toured around. He was a tall man, very gentlemanly, very attentive. At the end, he turned to me and said, "Mr. Kelly, are you telling me that this craft can take a main battle tank, that means 70 tons, from over the horizon, out of a well-decked ship, bring it ashore, and put it up on dry land?" I stood there looking at him, the stars, the metal, and I said, "Yes, sir." He paused, and his exact words were, "I am going to return to Washington, and I will testify before Congress, and I am telling them the Marines need this capability." I said, "Thank you." We parted. A few years later, I was in Washington, D.C., and I was walking through the Mayflower Hotel from the east side to the west side. As I'm heading west, and I look up and I see General Wilson coming the other way. And he says, he stops, sees me, big smile. I walk over. I say, "General, have you had a chance to ride on the landing craft air cushion?" He says, "Numerous times." "Oh. General, may I ask you a question?" "Sure, John." I said, "Have I resolved, and satisfied my moral obligation to the United States Marine?" He laughed and said, "Yes." We had a reputation and a stature with the United States Marines from then on that was unique. They went all over the world with what was conceived here and dreamed here and finally produced in quantities in New Orleans. Now, why New Orleans? Well, we had to have a credible production case. We had other people nipping hard at our heels, people with big facilities on the water, and we didn't even have a facility there at that time. And so New Orleans happens to be in the heart of the American commercial boat business. The commercial boat industry really was oriented towards the Gulf of Mexico oil resources. And secondly, NASA chose New Orleans to build the Saturn boosters, the big boosters, and that was quality aerospace welding. So I had a pool of welders, I had welding supply houses, and we had that, and we could do a job there, we believe. So that's where we are. It went into volume production. We built as many as 6 a year. We did something that was rare. We knew we were on the gun, under the gun, by people who wanted to shut us down and put us out of business, and they were going to attack us on two things: cost and performance.
Other speakers, John.
Other performances.
You're
So,
fading off, John.
excuse me?
Yeah, you gotta stay in front of that microphone. You're
Okay,
fading
excuse me,
off.
excuse me. So, the first LCAC that came out of our factory was 200,000 hours. We got it down, so the final one came out at 68,000 hours. And in between, we added a couple of 100 pounds of more stuff. So while we were adding stuff, we were taking cost out of it. And we had people from Washington come down and say, how do you do it? I said, it's good old aerospace, aircraft engineering, which you shipbuilders really don't understand. And they love that. But we helped it. So we held the budget and we delivered on schedule. Now, I want to tell you a little about what these machines face and what your military faces. And I'm going to pick D-Day, the biggest amphibious operation ever. Now, every military landing is called a D-Day, but to the world, there's only one D-Day, and that's Normandy. D-Day was set, date was fixed. Now, you know when D-Day was? No. It was set for June 5th, 1944. Everything was under control. Everything was ready. But they couldn't control the weather. So, they had weather stations. Some of them were in airplanes bouncing around, instruments rattling. Some of them were in ships. Some of them were here and yon. But one of them happened to be stuck out on the beach in the northwest corner of Ireland, in County Mayo, at a little known place called Black Sod. And they could stand there and look right out into the western part of the North Atlantic. And there was a 21-year-old girl, young lady, from southwest Ireland, and she finished school doing very well with her math, but she needed a job. And she saw something in the newspaper and said there was an opening in Black Sod for somebody good with numbers. So she walked for 2.5 days up to Black Sod, knocked on the door of the post office, and said, is the job still open? Expecting someone to take it. And it was open, and they hired her. And they said, here's your desk by the window, and we have a new postal system put in this country, and you're going to calculate the rates. So she sat down. Sometime later, I can't pin down where, the man in charge came and says, you have an added task. We are going to be a neutral country in this war. However, we are going to submit weather reports every hour, day and night, from Black Sod to Dublin. And that meant 2 in the morning, whatever it is. And shortly thereafter, they came in and put barometers and temperature devices and stuff. And she was sitting by the window, and she was astute enough that she could look out the window and correlate in her mind weather conditions as they changed to the data that came in from the instruments. And then she'd make the call and fill out the forms, and it would go to Dublin. After we're there, she didn't know where it went or who used it. What she didn't know is Dublin sent it to London, and London sent it to Southampton, and Southampton put it on Eisenhower's desk. So she's watching it, and she notes that sometime late on the 4th, maybe early on the 5th, her barometer starts dropping fast. And she puts in and writes it in, calls it in. She said, there's a storm coming, stormy weather's coming. Ends up on Eisenhower's desk. There may have been other reports like that. We don't really know. But she is sitting there up in that northwest corner looking out at the storm. She has credibility. Eisenhower looks around his conference room. You can just see Montgomery looking the other way, you know. And there's only a small group there. The two meteorologists that were there kind of never agreed on much anyway, supposedly. And he looks at this. He says, we're postponing the landing by 24 hours. There's 6,000 ships out there, and 200,000 troops. Everything going, stop, or stand by, or whatever that meant. 9 hours later, Maureen's barometer is going up. She sends in her X report. She said, there's a break in the weather coming. I'm forecasting a clearing from the morning of June 6th for the day. Eisenhower looks at it, realizes the credibility from the last one, looks at this, doesn't know it's coming from a 20-year-old young lady, looks at it and says, let's go. And that's how it became June 6th. They didn't know that story until 1956. Because it was thrown in the files, and in 1956, they put in a new weather automatic system in the post office, and they found this stuff. Now, a friend of mine named Stephen Ambrose, a historian at the University of New Orleans, writes wonderful books on World War II. He was invited to Gettysburg to be interviewed to be Eisenhower's biographer. He said to Eisenhower, they sat down, I'm from New Orleans. He says, you're from New Orleans. Did you know Andy Higgins? He said, no, he had passed on before I got there. He says, well, Andy, this is Eisenhower. Quote, Andy Higgins won the war for the United States. And Steve says, really, sir? He says, absolutely. The ports were too well defended. We had to go over the beach. And if we didn't get over the beach, quote, World War II would have been a negotiated settlement. That girl kept thousands of men from dying on the earlier date. And that's a landing craft story. Whether the Higgins boats wouldn't have done well. They're flat-bottom boats, no keels, they broach. Okay? This landing craft air cushion can now go across more beaches. Specifically, at the time of D-Day, the U.S. military could only get across 17% of the world's beaches. Today, they can get across 79% of the world's beaches because of what was thought up and conceived on these buildings. And in addition to that, they can clear the rough surf that the conventional Higgins boats couldn't have cleared. How important is that today? Well, hope to God we never have another D-Day like that. But when the tragedy of the Mideast occurred, with the invasion of Kuwait, the Kuwaiti forces were outnumbered. We had 5 Bell employees hidden out in Kuwait taking care of the Cadillac Age tanks because we had taken over that division. and they hid out, and we knew what went on. The Marines were assigned to go ashore in Kuwait. Walt Boomer, the general in charge in this Mideast dirty, dusty world, was well prepared. He was a botany graduate from Duke. So the Marines and Walt came in, went in and turned the 17 LCACs away to the east, and they came in at the Egyptian border, got behind the forces, and the forces were surrendering. We saved thousands of lives on all sides. When Kuwait was finished, the Marines were assembling and were starting to head home when they were told there was a typhoon coming into Bangladesh. And Bangladesh is somewhat like Louisiana. It's low, marshy, and people are poor. They live on rice, and they have their spot of land, and they plant the rice. When the tide comes up, if they go, somebody else takes it, their family has no food. So they stay on the spot of land, and the water comes up and up. So the Marines came up with the Bell design craft and got in. Sometime later, I met the colonel, Marine colonel, who was in charge. And I said, tell me about it. He says, I only have to tell you two things. Nobody ever published it, but we saved over 10,000 lives in Bangladesh. So between military operations, combat, or humanitarian aid, what was conceived in this plant is now totally accepted in the United States and around the world for fabulous life-saving operations. I could talk about Haiti, I could talk about other places, but we're not going to go into that. And that's when we say, how well did the Bell conceive and made things work? Just look at what happened in Desert Storm and what happened in Bangladesh. The U.S. government has now awarded a contract to Bell again for a great number of craft at a major amount of money. That's now personally established. On the East Coast and the West Coast are bases dedicated for the training, operation, and maintenance of just those craft. It's established, it's in place. And the technology started on Lake Erie with a Skimmer 1. And we got a model of the Skimmer 1 here and another one outside. So it's been a long road, but it's been a major road. I can think of many people I knew here in the years I was here, and I could probably mention names, but I want you to know those 26 families that chose to go to Louisiana did great things. We grew to having 1,400 employees, and I made the case to Textron when we entered a competition against a very politically connected company in California that we needed a facility, and they gave us agreement for a $10 million capital budget. Under what we did, and under what's now under contract, the gross funds to Bell is somewhere between $6 and $7 billion. Not bad on a $10 billion capital investment. Not, and along the way, Bill Diesel kept the light burning, kept the faith, kept trusting, and kept trusting, unlike most people in the industry would do, then and now. So, go home feeling pride in another thing that was done in Larry Bell's company with people like Bill Diesel and Wilcox and others. I am going to close on that note. I did not want to weigh down a lot of engineering numbers on you. I just wanted you to know it stood a hard test in what, and the point about D-Day is it's a precarious business of going ashore in an opposed situation. And a 20-year-old girl saved the day for the Marines. She's going to be 100 years old this June, and I intend to be in Ireland and make sure she gets a pat on the back in an appropriate way. Thank you. Now, if there's some questions, because obviously very appropriate. Please, sir, please.
How many of them do the Marines have today?
Well, I don't really know, but they ended up with in the 70s and 80s, and it was supposedly designed for a 25-year life. They got some around for 40 years. We delivered the first one. I mean, this is very important. I signed the contract with the Navy on June 5th, 1981. We designed the first one, designed it, built a 186 square foot factory, and delivered the first one in December of '84. 3 years, okay? And then we got it up to 6 a year. But then they realized that industry suddenly was, well, everybody wanted to become involved again. So there was how to conduct a further procurement was a lengthy process in government. They finally got around to it. But so they had to do this aluminum structure in a salt water environment. So they had to do some structural modification repairs. So they had a ship's life extension program, and they got ones out there that left the factory long, long ago. And I don't know how long, but there'll be a lot more coming down the line. And my second largest customer was Japan. The Japanese saw what we had. They set up a factory, and they decided they're going to build it. Well, it took us a couple of months to get that turned around. We got the contract with all the Japanese contractors, gave up no money, no offset.
I'm sorry, John, can you speak up?
Yeah, you're drifting off, John.
Okay. Sir, you have a question?
You mentioned the ascent engine for the lunar landing project. Did you know Dick Harms? Harms?
I'm sorry, I don't recall the name.
He was involved in that project, a good friend of mine. He said the night that left the moon, he sat and held his breath and turned blue because he was one of the people who built that engine.